Um, Hi, everyone at the center and online. Welcome to this session on karma, session 2. We have Venerable Lekden leading the session. Venerable Lekden is from the USA, and currently he's studying for his Geshe degree at Sarah J in South India. So welcome, Lekden. Thank you so much for leading the session.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. Saturday night, just the place to be, the hopping, exciting place to be at the Dharma Center. So I appreciate all of you coming, making time for us, making time for yourself, for your practice. So let's take a moment just to settle ourselves into the space, whether we're here in person or online, create a space for ourselves where all of our distractions from the day are put to the side. Whatever joys or obstacles we experience today, we let them go for the moment and allow our attention to come to this place, to this practice, so that we might study the Dharma, make the Dharma an important part of our lives, learn how to incorporate the teachings on karma, especially into our everyday life. And with that, let's set a strong motivation that we've come together today to study our minds, to study the practice of the Dharma, the law of cause and effect, and as it applies to our life, not merely for our educational benefit, and not for our own benefit alone, for our own worldly happiness, or even our spiritual happiness, but so that we might be of more benefit to others, so that we might quickly and more quickly develop skill and wisdom, so we might become Buddhas and have the ultimate capacity to be of service and benefit to other sentient beings. So set a strong motivation. I am studying the Dharma. I am studying my mind. I'm engaging in this practice now, not for myself alone, but so that I might be able to be of more service to others in this and in all future lives. So setting that strong motivation, let's offer a few prayers in the beginning. So we'll offer the normal prayers on page 34 of our golden book, starting with refuge and bodhicitta, which we'll do 3 times in Tibetan and then once in English. And then we'll continue with the prayers on those pages. And I mentioned this last Sunday, not Saturday, but what I would like to do, hypothetically in the future, is to have students serve as umze. So the teacher doesn't have to do it. And so sometime in the near future, it would be good to have students that for the things that we have tunes for, they learn the tunes and feel confident to be reciting them. And with the things we don't have tunes for, just the students develop confidence in leading the prayers. And so in the future, I think it would be great for students to, so umze means chant leader, right, in Tibetan. U means head, and ze means performer, or engaging in deeds. So it would be good to have students be able to lead the prayers. The Dharma centers I came up in, it was always the students that led the prayers, or some of the students, not the main teacher. So that's something we'd like to start doing here as well. So just keep that in mind. And I'm going to be talking more to Deep Tila about it moving forward. So there's something for everyone to think about. But for now, I'll do it. So Sangye cheran soki chonam lai jancho paru dagni kyapsu chi dagi jinsogi pe sonam gi yola pinche sangye dru parsho Sangye cheran soki chonam la jancho paru dagni kyapsu chi dagi jinsogi pe sonam gi Jola pinche sange drupasho sange chiram soki chonam la janchu paru dagni kalsuchi dagi jinsogi pesonam gi jola pinche sange drupasho. And go for refuge in time and light into the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain unto the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. So I'll offer short mandala first in Tibetan and then in English. 사시프기 조익식내도 트라미라블링시 니댕겐파디 상계싱드 미테으와이 로크나만다싱라 슈파쇼. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. And we'll continue with offering praise to Shakyamuni Buddha on page 73. The founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, and the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, The one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all three ever devout homage. To all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms, atoms, and all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see, condition things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. Great. Thank you. So welcome to our second class on karma. A brief note before I begin about our change in the schedule. We had originally planned on there being 5 weeks for karma, but now we're going to do 4 only, and there'll be 1 week off. Because the last week, Venerable Kelden is invited to speak at a conference, at a big conference. And so he isn't able to make it. And just the way I'm teaching the week before and the week after. So we decided I offered to do it online, and Shanti said, oh, there are other things that can happen at the center. So we're going to do 4 weeks instead of 5. And that's fine. We'll all know everything there is to know about karma before we're done. I don't promise that, but we'll do our best. Also, just a reminder that it is Sakadawa, so it is the 4th month of the Tibetan calendar. So the 4th month is the month that we celebrate the Buddha's birth and his enlightenment and his death. We say that all happened on the same day in the Tibetan system. That's on the 15th of the month. The whole month is considered a meritorious month. So it's an important month to do practice and to do study. We believe that since there is such focus put on practice and study in this month, and there are so many practitioners that are devoting their time and energy in a special way, that increases your own merit as a result and the power of your practice. But also on the 15th, on Sakadawa Duchen, on the actual holiday, there's going to be a puja here at the center, led by Venerable Gachek. That's this Wednesday, upcoming Wednesday.
11.
Yeah. Sorry, the 15th of the Tibetan month. Sorry about that. Yeah. So the actual holiday is on the Tibetan 15th, which is Wednesday, the 11th. There'll be a puja here, and Venerable Gachek will also be teaching next weekend instead of me. So just as a reminder about that. So to kind of go over a little bit what we did last week is, where does karma fall when we're studying Lamrim? Where does karma fall in our Lamrim study? Which of the 3 scopes is it? Small scope, medium scope, or great scope? Small scope, right? And in the small scope, so what is the goal of the small scope beings?
Little life,
Right, a positive rebirth, so they can continue practice. What's the goal of a medium scope?
liberation. Liberation from samsara.
Liberation from samsara for themselves alone, right? And then, obviously, the great scope goal is Buddhahood, so we can benefit all sentient beings. And now, in the small scope, what immediately precedes karma as we study and we practice?
Suffering of the world.
Suffering in the lower realms. But what's the goal of that? Like, why does that come before this?
Renunciation.
Really, it is renunciation. It's more so that we're studying refuge, right? So if we think the whole point of the preliminary part of the Lamrim is to encourage our practice, right? So first we study the importance of having a perfect human rebirth. Well, first we really study from Tsongkhapa's tradition, guru devotion, relying on a spiritual friend. That's first. That if you look at Atisha's text and some of the early non-Gelug texts, like the texts by some of the Nyingma teachers, guru devotion isn't first. That is like an invention that Tsongkhapa brought. But so we start with guru devotion. Then first is perfect human rebirth. That's to make us realize how valuable of an opportunity we have to practice. And then death and impermanence. right? That is helping us then, once we realize how valuable our practice is, we become motivated to practice, okay? And then we study the suffering of the lower realms and refuge at the same time, because it's the fear of the suffering of the lower realms that is one of the primary causes for taking refuge. Not the only cause, but one of the primary causes. So those can be studied, and they're really studied and practiced simultaneously. So the order is not too important because they go together. But so that is actually becoming Buddhist, right? Making sure that your practices are in line with the teachings of the Buddha. But so then that's where karma comes in. Karma, the law of cause and effect. And now that we realize how important it is to study, we're motivated to study, we are convinced that following the path of the Dharma is the right path to follow. Now we have to know what to do, right? That's the point of studying karma, is what actions should we be taking and following in order to be following in the footsteps of the Buddha, right? So it's important to recognize where these topics come in the Lamrim structure, simply because that makes us understand why it's important to study. Like being able to like write the exam question, like that doesn't matter. But if you know that this is a practice that's shared with a smaller scope, so if I only focus on this and I don't conjoin it with bodhicitta, it's only going to lead towards a better rebirth only, right? So that's helpful to realize, just to give you an organization in your mind of what this practice is helping me accomplish, right? And why it's valuable to my overall practice. So we study karma to understand and to have confidence in the fact that engaging in virtuous actions matter and avoiding non-virtuous actions matter, right? And then being able to distinguish between those two. And so when you study karma, you're also studying what the results of karma are going to be, right? Because conceptually, karma can be pretty easy to understand. Whether or not you have faith in it or really understand it, you do bad things, there are bad results. You do good things, there are good results. And bad and good, that binary distinction is a little bit blurry. But even as a general idea, okay, that's like pretty easy. But then we go deeper into that because we want to know what type of actions qualify as virtuous, qualify as non-virtuous, and what makes those actions heavy or light, So there are all these different aspects. And so first, we talked about the fact that karma is something you accumulate all the time, right? Because it's a type of mind and type of motivation that may or may not be explicit. We don't have to have the explicit motivation to have an implicit motivation accompanying all of our actions of body, speech, and mind. So everything we do, we're creating some sort of karma. It may be a very weak karma. It may not be very substantial, right? Its results may be very minimal, but everything we do is creating a source of karma. So the idea that we can ever engage in actions that aren't creating karma is kind of foolhardy, right? Doesn't matter if you believe in karma or not, you're creating karma. Now, it could be neutral. I'd say a lot of the karma we create is more or less neutral, right? But we're still doing something. So you can't avoid it, unfortunately, right? That's the most important thing to start with. We also talked about, if we're just going to be pedantic, right? That generally karma exists for a brief moment, any individual karma, and it's a type of mind generally. And then once that karma ceases to exist, it turns into what we call an imprint, right? And it's the imprint that is actually stays with our mental continuum and travels from life to life with our very subtle mind. But often we talk about that imprint and karma as if they're the same thing. And that's fine. You even see that in the texts. It's often they'll say karma, but they mean imprint. In going back to the text from the Buddha and commentators, then there's often a line that says, well, we really mean this, but we're using this term, So it's just important to know, because if we're going to study it, we should, when you study at the monastery, literally every syllable matters. And you can go to debate for an hour about if you put the words in different order, if it means something different. So it's important just to recognize the distinction between a karma and an imprint. It's also, not everyone agrees. So if you have monks from Sergei debating monks from Gyalten, we have different definitions of how long a karma can exist, And so not everyone agrees 100%, So that's an important thing to know, that these things are very important, right? These are the foundations of our practice, and we understand how they work, but there are things about them around the edges that we understand the whole process, but little details we're still struggling with, right? And the purpose of studying isn't to know everything like an encyclopedia and to just have me feed information to you. It's for you to learn these things, struggle with them yourself, and find a way that they make sense in your life and in your mind, both in your practice, but also just in an intellectual sense. We need both, right? We start with intellectual understanding, and then once we have that, then that develops into an experiential understanding, I know I have friends when I was studying in grad school who he's a professor of Tibetan Buddhist studies now. He went and got his PhD and he teaches. But he was a very he's my best friend in grad school. He grew up in California, in like a really rough part of California. He had like bars on his window and bullet holes in his wall. Like, you know, he got kicked out of 3 or 4 high schools without graduating because his behavior was so bad. And he became a guitar techie and he toured the world with Megadeth and with Slayer. And he did sex, drugs, rock and roll really hard. And he burned out when he was 23 and also was deaf in 1 ear. And then he found the Dharma and it changed his life. And he went to Kopan for quite a while, so Lama Zopa's monastery in Nepal. And he studied there. He never ordained because he knew he didn't want to live the life of a monk, but he studied there as a layperson. And he is a Geluk like us, but he also is very critical of the Geluks. And he says, oh, you have your textbooks and everything your textbook says, because at the monasteries, we have a textbook that we use as our debate manuals. And he goes, and you just believe your textbook. You don't do anything else. And that couldn't be further from the truth. He likes to poke at us. But the truth is these textbooks, the way we use them is their starting point. And what they're doing is they're challenging you. If you just believe everything you study to be prima facie, like the word themselves is 100% true, you're not going to have any depth of meaning, right? They even say that the Sarah May textbook was composed by a student of Gyalten Gyalten, who composed the Sarah J textbook, okay? For many of the years, not all the years, but for all of the Parchin section. He composed that textbook, and Gyalten Gyalten looked at it and he said, this is the same thing as mine, what I wrote. This isn't, you have to use the same rikpa, the same logic, but have different results. Otherwise, what's the point of writing your own textbook? Write it over again. So he intentionally said you have to use the same source material, the same quotations, use the same type of logic, but see what different answers you can find. Because the point of study isn't to be force-fed answers. It's to be force-fed the means to understand on your own, right? So even with something like karma, I'm going to teach you the way I was taught karma, which I believe is the accurate understanding of karma that comes to me from my teachers and from the lineage that I've studied. But there may be things around the edges that you might find other teachers teaching it differently. And you have to look at those things and see how they work with what the Buddha said and how it makes sense to you, right? And you'll see, even though there are these little disagreements, the big picture is going to be the same, right? That's the important thing. But it's useful to realize that even the teachers, they are willing to have disagreements because this is difficult material, right? If it was easy, we'd all be Buddhists. That's the important thing I always remind myself. If this was easy, we'd all be Buddhists. So we use the word karma, we're often going to be meaning imprint, and just to know that. The reason it's important to understand karma, again, we talked about, is that karma shows us that we are responsible for our own happiness and for our own suffering, and we have control over our own life. And that the circumstances we are experiencing now, we may not control them in this life, but they still are the result of the actions we've taken in the past. They're not forced upon us from outside forces, right? And so that isn't to blame us, but it's to recognize that we have a role to play. And that is actually a liberatory concept, that you're not being judged or punished. Even the worst thing that can happen to you in your life isn't a punishment. That's just the natural result of things that happened in the past. And it's an opportunity for you to then grow as a person and to break the cycle of suffering, right? So we study karma as a way of understanding that we are in control of our own circumstances and we're not the victims of fate, okay? And what was the big thing we talked about last week was the 4 general principles of karma, right? So what are those 4? It's definite, that's the first one. So what's that mean?
Any karma will
Okay.
it will produce result.
Not quite.
Good virtue comes out of good actions. And good actions lead to, and bad actions will lead to suffering. And
right. So what's an easy?
And one can't change that at all.
That is the definite part. So the analogy I like to give is that when you plant an apple seed, you're going to get an apple tree. And when you plant a mango seed, you're going to get a mango tree, right? So that's what we mean by definite, is that the result is always going to be in line with the cause. And so what's the second general principle?
Expansiveness of karma.
Expansiveness. What was the term we used last week? That I was trying to use the FPMT terminology. Dynamic, right? But what they mean by dynamic is expansiveness, right? That it grows. So one small action will have an outsized result, both positive karma and negative karma, unless you do something to stop it, right? So when you create a negative karma, if you don't act with a mind of regret to purify it or to do something to stop it, the outsized result will happen that'll be much more deleterious than the small cause. But the same thing with positive karma. If you don't have minds of anger or jealousy or attachment that can dampen the propensities of that karma, then it can have a much bigger result than the small action that preceded it. So that's the second. So it's definite and it's dynamic, or expansive. That's fine. What's the third one? You said. No, you just said it's specific, right? So that's the third one they used. So what do we mean by specific?
Just like it's not transferable.
Yeah, non-transferable, exactly. So you can't experience the results of a karma you did not create, right? So it's specific in terms of the person that creates it is the one that's going to experience the result. And of course, we did talk a little bit about there being such thing as collective karma, where you create karma in relation to other beings, but still you have to somehow engage in the activity to create that karma. It can't be something that happens from the outside. And we've also talked about how it's possible that, like, for instance, prayers for the dead or for the sick and so forth, we can't change their karma, but what we can do is help create the positive conditions that will cause the positive karmas they've already created to ripen. So we can't affect the karmas they have or have not created in their lifetimes, but we can help manipulate the conditions to hopefully they've created good karma and that will ripen. So we can push them in that direction, but we can't, our prayers, for instance, aren't going to give karma to other people, merit to other people. Okay, so we have definite, dynamic, specific, and lastly, dormant and not extinguished. The same thing. So again, these terms are like, I found them in one of the FPMT instruction manuals. So I wanted to try to use them in case people studied any more FPMT materials. I thought the terms might come up again. I'd never seen them before. So I'm trying to wrap my head around them as well. But so dormant or it is not extinguished. So the meaning is the same, is that a karma is not, it is always going to have a result. Now it's sometimes, if it's a very strong action, it can have a result in this life, or it can have a result in your next life, or in sometime in the future, in future lives, undetermined. But it's always going to have a result unless you do something to prevent it from having a result. So a seed is always going to grow when the conditions are right, unless you burn it or you flood it or you do something to destroy the seed in that way. So those are the four general principles of karma. And they're important to remember because they show us that karma is this active dynamic process, that it isn't just a simple black and white idea, and we understand the contours of it. And that's what helps give us confidence and faith that I'm not experiencing something that I'm not experiencing the results of someone else's actions, right? So this idea of responsibility over my own fate, as you will, that comes from understanding these four aspects of karma. The important thing when studying karma, and I'm going to repeat it all the time, is that karma isn't fatalistic, right? Karma, and it isn't passive. So karma isn't blaming you. It isn't saying you're a bad person. That's why you're receiving negative situations or negative results. It is a mere recognition of how cause and effect works, okay? And it isn't passive in the sense that when you see someone else experiencing something, you shouldn't say, well, they deserve it because it's their karma, therefore I'm not going to do anything to help them, right? You should always recognize that karma is also offering you the opportunity to then be of service to others, right? And that's that same karma. So if I see someone on the street who is in pain or is struggling in some way, it was their karma to experience that suffering. It was also their karma to be in proximity to me or to other people who could help them, right? So it's not like one size fits all kind of answer. So karma isn't passive. It isn't an excuse to do nothing. Karma should make you motivated to act for yourself and for others. So it should encourage action, not apathy. Okay, so and then lastly, the last bit of review is that karma ripens when the conditions are right. That's the important thing. And the conditions aren't something the conditions we can control to some extent, but we don't necessarily understand them. I can't guarantee that when you have A, B, and C, that's when D is going to ripen. We can't understand that, but we can understand that if I am actively engaging in virtuous practice now, that is encouraging virtuous karma to ripen that I've already created. But it also could be encouraging non-virtuous karma to ripen because I've created a condition where I can navigate that non-virtuous karma in a healthy way as opposed to it ripening later where it might have an oversized effect, like me being reborn in a hell realm or so forth, right? So it's not that easy to understand, but what's important to know is that we can affect the conditions so that whatever karma ripens, we have the mental space to navigate it in a healthy way, right? But the importance of recognizing that karma ripens when the conditions are right is simply to recognize that it may seem like there are people who only engage in harmful action and are selfish and mean and cruel, and yet good things keep happening to them. And that's because they created the karma for that in the past. And for some reason or another, that positive karma has met with the right conditions in their life to ripen, right? And the idea of deserving doesn't come into it. They created the causes for that good karma to ripen. And now the real sad thing is when you see instances of that, you realize they have all these opportunities, maybe more opportunities than we have. And instead of using them to progress on a spiritual path, to create more good karma, to help others, they're using them to feed their own ego and to buy a one-way ticket to the lower realms. Like they're doing the opposite of what we should do, right? So when you see those kind of situations, understanding that they just happen to have created the karma in the past that's met with the right conditions to ripen, and the fact that they're wasting it is actually a cause for us to generate compassion, or it should be a means for us to generate compassion, right? First instinct is usually going to be jealousy. So then we have to really, right? Because you see people, you're like, why is this jerk at everything? Like he doesn't do anything right. He's mean, yet everything he wants, it seems to go his way. Where I'm working my butt off and I keep getting short-shifted over and over again, right? Like we all have that experience sometimes. And that is like our human nature to have that experience. But when you take a step back, you say, well, is that mind helping me in any way, right? Never mind that's totally misunderstanding the law of karma. But even taking a step back from the law of karma, like, is that mindset helpful in any way? And when you realize it isn't helpful, that helps you kind of diminish its power. And then you use your study to be like, okay, well, why is it that he is experiencing those things and I'm experiencing these? And that's where the law of karma and understanding it helps. And so then when you have the understanding of the law of karma, then you won't develop that jealousy or that enmity or that anger in the first place, right? So that's what you have to do both. Work on experiencing your emotions, recognizing them, and then producing antidotes to them as quickly as you can. When that involves being able to have some sort of mindfulness practice or introspection to be recognized when your emotions are coming up out of your control. So you're not just, flying by the seat of your pants, that you have some sort of control over what's going on in your mind. And that's on one side. And then the other side is the study we do. So then help prevent those emotions from coming in the first place, right? So we have to do both sides. Okay. So now there's a question, we talk about engaging. So actions are going to be virtuous or non-virtuous, right? And obviously mixed. And so right now, as we study karma, and we study the 10 non-virtuous activities or the 10 paths of non-virtue and the 10 paths of virtue. Right now, it takes us so much effort. So there's a question like, shouldn't we just be effortlessly virtuous, right? Is it worthwhile that we have to put so much effort into it? And is it as useful? And he said, well, yeah, sure. You should be effortlessly virtuous, but you can't just flip a switch, right? So the fact that we're kind of fabricating it, that we are faking it till we make it, is a perfectly valid way of engaging in this, because we've had bad habits for so long, it takes effort to break our bad habits. And I say that just because sometimes you can have this kind of imposter syndrome, right? That says, I'm doing this because I know it's the right thing to do, and because I understand it's going to have good results, but like I don't really feel it, but I'm doing it anyway. I'm just going through the motions, and that's okay. That's not where you want to be in the end, but it's a perfectly valid place to be to start, right? So always recognize that if you are setting your mind on virtue, even if it's with the intent that this is going to have a positive outcome in this life or in future lives, that's not like the ideal motivation, but it is still a valid virtuous spiritual motivation, right? So it's better to do virtue that takes effort and feels forced than no virtue at all, So you don't want to sacrifice the good in exchange for the perfect. You say, if my virtue isn't effortless and easy, then I'm not going to even bother putting any effort in. That's not useful, right? So yeah, sure.
This be intention for the small scope to like accumulate merit, because then that would lead to a better birth.
So yes, if that is the limit of your intention, then it is a small scope practice. So when we look at the 3 scopes, we say that we look at the meditations and the topics of the small and medium scopes as being in common with the great scope. So we still try to have a mind of bodhicitta when we engage in these practices. So we should still try to have the mindset that says, even when I'm engaging in this small scope practice, in the back of my mind, it's with the intention that I can eventually become a Buddha so I can benefit all sentient beings. And then even if the practice is on its face a small scope practice, or in line or in common with the small scope, we still have a great scope intention behind it, right? But even if it is just a small scope practice, that's still Dharma, right? That's the important thing. Like Pabonka says, you know, when you're looking at the 4 scopes, he says, if you have 4 people reciting, his example is reciting praises to Tara together, and one of them is wishing to have happiness in this life, and one of them is wishing for a good rebirth. One is motivated by wanting to be free from samsara, and one is motivated to become a Buddha. That first one isn't practicing Dharma at all, even though the external signs, they're reciting praises to Tara, look like they're practicing Dharma. If all they're wishing for is happiness in this life, that's not a Dharma practice. The other 3 are all practicing Dharma, but just on different levels, right? They're embodying different mentalities and different intentionalities, but it's still Dharma, right? But so as long as we're not doing these practices for happiness in this life alone, then we're still engaging in a Dharma practice. And it's also, you know what? It's okay to want to not have a hard time in this life. Like, you know, we spend so much time talking about wanting to become Buddhas and not, you know, especially, you know, one of my favorite things is the 8 worldly dharmas and like trying to destroy your mind of self-cherishing, right? And so the mind of self-cherishing is looking at like anything motivated by comfort and motivated by seeking out either comfort or avoiding discomfort, right? It is okay to want to not have a hard life. Like that is valid. Yeah, Shanti.
Benjamin, I have a question that there's somewhere in the Lama text it says also at some point, sometimes things are happening in some situation. And you can say, oh, it's my karma, it's getting purified, it's my fault that I'm facing these things. But you can also go to too great an extent. Obviously, you have to stop certain situations from happening or people from doing certain things, and then like you have to like work against those external obstacles as if they were external. Obviously, they're from because of your own thing, but you still have to work against those.
Yeah.
Not to overdo the kind of blame and whatever being detached from the suffering result.
So when you study even texts like the Bodhicharyavatara, the Way of the Bodhisattva, or any of the Lojong texts or the 37 practices of Bodhisattvas, they're setting an example of what a Bodhisattva would do in certain circumstances, right? But we don't have that capacity right now. And so often when we're in circumstances, we need to take the steps to remove ourselves from difficult circumstances if we can, to then create a space for our mind to engage in the inner work. So if you are able to prevent something from happening, or let's say an example that comes up often is if you are in like an abusive situation, right? If you're in an abusive relationship or it's some sort of abusive situation, you don't have to just say, what's my karma to experience this, therefore I'm going to stay here. If you have the means to leave that situation, to prevent that violence, either emotional or physical or whatever violence to happening to you, it is fine and perfectly acceptable and a good thing to pull yourself out of that situation, right? And now, you can do that at the same time as recognizing the reason I'm experiencing this is a result of things I did in the past. But also the reason I have the means to extricate myself from the situation is also because of things I've done in the past. That's what I mean when I say karma is active. It isn't passive. It isn't saying I deserve this, therefore I'm going to stay in the situation and allow myself to be abused, right? Now, obviously, we say that if you have to engage in a harmful action to be free of it, you want to avoid that, right? And we also say, if you look at examples from the Bodhisattvas and in the teachings, they might not ever leave those situations because it may be a perfect practice for them because their minds are so advanced. Good for them. But we're not there, right? Like we are still suffering sentient beings who don't have that high level of realization. You know, when you talk about, like, for instance, we talk about the practice of generosity. We should be willing to give our life for a single sentient being. Like that is the generosity we should hope to be able to accomplish. But until you actually have a direct realization into the nature of reality, they say, you won't have developed the ability to do that without having some sort of mind of regret, right? So therefore, even though that is the goal, that is the paradigm that we're trying to copy, we haven't reached that state yet. So we have to be able to do what's within our limits, recognize our limits, not use our limits as an excuse, you know, but realize where our limits are and then work within those. So if I'm in an abusive situation, yes, it is my karma that is ripening to experience that abuse, but it's also my karma that gives me the opportunity to hopefully find a way out of that abuse. And just saying, I deserve this, therefore I'm going to let it happen to me, isn't a correct application of the understanding of karma, right?
So in such a situation, Bhantaji, maybe the right thing to do would be to listen to your intuition or your inner voice, which would tell you whether you should stay on in the situation or to move away. So do you think the inner voice or listening to your intuition is the right thing to do in such a situation?
Sometimes the problem is our intuition has kept us in samsara for countless lifetimes, right? So sometimes our intuition is just going to try to do what's best for our self-cherishing mind and is going to reinforce bad habits. So it's hard to just say yes, but in general, you don't want to put yourself in a situation that's making it more difficult for you to practice, right? Like we have this opportunity to practice a spiritual path now. And if this is a huge obstacle to my practice, then I should do whatever I have to allow myself to practice. And I think another, a perfect example of the very similar situation is when you study developing a mind of calm abiding or a shamatha, right? Ideally, so a single pointed concentration. When you actually develop that practice, your mind can be single pointed, sit in single pointed concentration on any object within a moment without any effort. And in the middle of the busiest city, the busiest market, you can have perfect concentration. But in order to develop that, the very first piece of advice is abandon your homeland. Find an isolated place. And that's because when you're starting out, you need to create as positive and beneficial conditions as possible because you have so many inner obstacles. You have to remove as many outer obstacles as possible. And then as the inner obstacles are overcome, then you can overcome some of the outer obstacles. So I think Shantala's point, I agree with, that we shouldn't let our understanding of karma allow us to be passive. But at the same time, it is important, even if you're in, again, this example of being in an abusive situation, it is important to recognize that this abuse is because I created the karma for this. And this isn't coming from nowhere. And this person is someone who I have engaged in harm with, I have engaged in harmful activity toward in the past. So this abuse I'm feeling, it's not my fault in the sense that I'm to blame and therefore I deserve it. That's not an accurate understanding. But again, this didn't come from nowhere, right? Because if you allow yourself to think this came from nowhere, then everything feels hopeless. And if it feels hopeless, then there's no point in practicing. There's no point in practicing virtue if no matter how much virtuous activity I engage in, I'm still going to experience this, right? So having that recognition doesn't prevent you from then extricating yourself from the situation, but it just provides a different context for understanding your situation. A lot about understanding karma is about understanding context, so we can align our experience with reality, basically. Right?
Bhantaji, if you extricate yourself from a situation like which you referred to, wouldn't that just postpone the sort of working out of that situation? Maybe it'll come back to you later. So it's like escaping from the situation which you can't really escape from in the silent manner.
This is mentioned briefly in the text I mentioned last week. The exposition of karma is a teaching from the Buddha. So a karma needs to ripen completely, right? But if I'm in a situation right now where a negative karma I created in the past is ripening in me experiencing abuse from another person, and then I extricate myself from that situation before that karma has fully ripened, right? It still has to finish ripening, but by extricating myself, it might ripen in a different way. It doesn't always have to ripen just by this particular person giving me this particular type of abuse, right? So by extricating myself from the situation, by engaging in virtuous practice, it may decrease the power of that karma. So then it ripens in a different way. So the example they give is of a being who was born in a hell realm and had experienced. The example is a being who was born in a hell realm and experienced like a wheel made of swords constantly over their head, like cutting their head open over and over again. And then their lifespan ended before that karma was exhausted. They were reborn as a human, but they had migraines, right? So that karma hadn't finished yet, but obviously being a human with migraines is much better than being a hell being, right? So we can extricate ourselves from that karma and it is still going to play out, but it doesn't have to be the same way, right?
But
Yeah, go ahead.
to my understanding, and please correct me, that we are trying to, all this is to cheat this karma.
Is to what?
Is to cheat the karma. if we live out all the karmas that we all have already accumulated, we'll really never get liberated. Because whenever we get liberated, at that time there are many, many karmas which have not completely, we have not lived those life. So that notion that we have to live all the karmas and only then we will get liberated in some traditions, that we exhaust all the karmas, then we get liberated, is not what we are doing here. We don't want to live all the karmas.
Well, no. We have to then purify the karma, right? Yeah. But so the karma has to be exhausted, but it either is going to be exhausted by ripening of its own accord or exhausted by us purifying it.
Exactly.
Right.
So we don't have to experience everything.
Correct. We don't have to experience the results of every karma we created, and hopefully we won't. That's the whole purpose of engaging in virtuous practice, and especially engaging in purification practice, is to help either diminish or totally eliminate the negative karma we've created and the negative imprints, so they either ripen in a much lesser degree or they don't ripen at all. So that is the point of our virtues, or not the only point, but one of the aspects, yes. But if we understand that we have taken rebirth again and again and again since the beginning of this time and been born in samsara over and over and over again, the amount of negative karma we've created is huge, as is the amount of positive karma, of merit, right? If we hadn't created skies full of merit, we wouldn't be here together studying the Dharma. Like, it's so rare and difficult to be reborn as a human with the opportunity to study the Dharma in a meaningful way, and not just to have the intellect for it, but the time, the capacity, the means, the inspiration. It's incredibly difficult, right? And so the fact that we're here studying together shows that we've created skies of positive karma, but we've created similar amounts of negative karma. And so it's a constant practice of purification and accumulation. Those are the two things we're always trying to do: accumulate positive karma and purify negative karma. Right? We talked. Oh no, that was last Sunday. We talked about the 7-limb prayer. You know, one of the prayers we recite in the beginning of our class is the 7-limb prayer, and those 7 limbs work together to help purify our negative karma and accumulate accumulate merit, and then increase merit as well, paralleling the behavior of a Buddha who has perfected all of the realizations and abandoned all of the obscurations and afflictions. But yeah, it's not, but again, that goes with karma. We're not passive. We don't just say, okay, karma is going to happen, I'm going to let it happen. That is not a useful way to live, right? We would just be in samsara over and over again. Because the problem is, we create karma constantly. You can't just let it run out, you know?
Yeah, I mean, apart from definitive karmas, we have to deal with the rest of them so that they don't fructify completely and we get liberated much before they do.
But I mean, yeah, it's the more we practice, the more karma we can purify, right? So like having insight and wisdom and being able to, you know, this is getting a little bit off track, but you know, the actual antidote to our afflicted minds is the mind that rests in single point in concentration on the nature of reality, right? So being able to actually understand emptiness, that and sit in meditation on emptiness, that is what serves as the antidote to the afflictions. And then the different levels of meditation that we're able to achieve that are accompanied by our merit, right? It's our accumulation of merit that helps empower the deepening of our meditation practice. So we have the accumulations of merit and wisdom, and they work together. But it's the actual meditation on emptiness is what actually purifies the afflictions, not the karma, but the afflictions we have, and the afflictions. So dripa, not just afflictions. The dripa. How do you say dripa?
Seeds of the
No. The obstacles to omniscience, right? The obstacles. So the obstacle. It's not obstacle. What's the word that we use in English? Obscurations. Thank you. So the two obscurations, right? The afflicted obscurations and the obscurations to omniscience. It's actually realizing emptiness. It is to serve as the actual antidote. Sorry, I forget the English terms sometimes. I'm very appreciative of your help. Okay, so let's try to move on. But thank you. Ask questions all the time. So the next thing I want to talk about is that once we understand that karma has these 4 general principles, and that applies to all the karma we create, then we want to understand what are the different types of karmic results, okay? And so in general, we say the karmic results are divided into 2. So the first is what we'd call throwing karma, or sometimes it's called ripening karma. And then the other one is called completing karma, right? So in general, we say there are these 2. So throwing karma or ripening karma is the karma that actually propels us into a future rebirth, right? So those are the most powerful karmas. Those are the karmas, when they ripen, they cause us to be born as a human or as whatever it may be. And that's why it's called ripening or throwing. Throwing is because it sometimes propelling it's called, because it propels you into whatever your future rebirth is going to be. So those karmas are particularly powerful, right? And I'll talk about what that means by being powerful. We'll get there a little later. Now, completing karma has a couple different types. So generally we say there are 3 types of completing karma. So often you'll see the 4 types of karmic results, but really it's 1 type is propelling karma and 3 types are completing karma, okay? So the completing karma, the first type is karma that is similar to cause in experience. And so what that means is if I cause harm to someone else, then I'll experience harm. Or maybe I'll experience sickness or a short lifespan or something else that is similar to the experience. The experience I have is similar to the cause that brought it about, okay? So similar to cause and experience. The next one is, I think, the most insidious of type of karmic results, and that is similar to cause in habit, or sometimes they say similar to cause in behavior. And what that means is for instance, if I engage in the act of killing, it becomes easier to kill. I develop the propensity to engage in harm to other beings, right? In this life, but also in future lives. So the reason I call it insidious is when you engage in harmful actions, it becomes your second nature. And we don't have to even look at karma to understand this. We can look at just our everyday lives, that the more you do anything, the easier it becomes. You have to think about it less, right? And so karma is saying is that doesn't just work in your everyday life. That's working across lifetimes, right? And the reason it's insidious is because now, if I were to go kill someone, it'd be very difficult, right? I have a lot of difficulty doing it. But if I do it a few times, then in the future, it just gets easier, easier, easier. And in future lives, I don't even think about it, right? And so then you're just constantly creating more and more negative karma and not even realizing you are. So that's why I think that the karma that is similar to the cause in habit or in behavior is the most insidious because it creates a negative feedback loop, right? Though you can look at it as being also the most beneficial because it's the same for positive karma, right? That the more you engage in virtue now, the easier it is to do those things, both in this life and in future lives, that you're creating new habits, right? And you want your habits to line up with virtue. So with all these things, it's double-edged sword. But that, I think, is the one that is kind of the scariest, is that it's creating habits that you aren't aware of, right? And then the third type of completing karma is what we call environmental karma. So that is such as where you're born, the situation you're born in, the conditions that you were born in, right? So the environmental karma that may come from killing would be that you are born in an area where it is a difficult life and you often are sick and you might have a short lifespan and you have difficult neighbors and harsh conditions like this, or the environmental karma of engaging in stealing is you are born somewhere that is quite poor and people are always, stealing from you and you don't have any stability or safety in your living situation like that, So that is environmental karma or the environmental result. So those are the 4 types of karmic results, okay? And the reason they're important is any one karmic act can have all 4 of those results, right? Especially a powerful karmic act. So one act of killing can have a propelling karma that would cause me to be reborn, usually in a hell realm. But it also would then have a karmic result that is similar to the cause and experience, where I experience harm from other beings or violence from other beings. And it would ripen as me having propensity to engage in harmful activities and to kill. And it would have an environmental result as well. So all of those results can come from one karmic action, right? Which just goes to the point that we need to purify karma as much as we can. Just letting it play out, the results can be so much bigger than the cause that we can't just hope for the best, We have to do the work now. So what do I mean when I say a heavy karmic activity, right? What does that mean? But a complete karmic activity. So this is getting in the weeds a little bit, but this is what we're here for, right? So we say for a karmic activity to be complete, it has to have 4 parts, right? So the first is the basis, And I'll explain these, but I'll list them first, then I'll explain them. It has to have the basis, and then there is the intention, and then there is the actual deed or the action, and the completion of the action. And now the basis is going to depend on what the action you're talking about is. So again, I'll talk about it for the purposes of killing right now, but hopefully either today or in a future class, we'll have a chance to look at all of these as they apply to all the different non-virtuous activities, or the 10 non-virtues. But let's just stick with killing, because that's the kind of grossest one and the easiest. So the basis would be another sentient being, right? So you can't kill a non-sentient thing. So the basis for killing is quite easy. It's another sentient being. Now, if you're talking about a vow, like your vow not to kill a human, then the basis would be a human, right? But just the act of killing itself is any sentient being. Or actually, excuse me, we'd say any person, any ganzak, because you could also kill a Buddha, which is not a sentient being. But so any other being, right? Any living being is the basis. Now, the intention has 3 parts. So even though we said there's 4 components or aspects to a complete karmic act, the intention is broken into 3. So the intention, first is the recognition. So you have to recognize that the basis is what you think it is, right? That's important. So that has to do with, for instance, if I am walking down the street and I step on an insect, I don't recognize that I'm engaging in harm towards a sentient being, right? So I don't have a complete intention there because I don't have proper recognition. Or for some reason, I think that this is a statue or not a living being, and I cause harm to it, and then I realize I was wrong. It is a living being. Then it's not. I don't have a complete intention. Now, sometimes we don't have to have perfect recognition, and that is to say, if I intend to kill Tashi and I kill, Tenzin instead, that recognition isn't perfect, right? Because I was intending one person and I did another person. I killed another person. That doesn't matter in this case. For some actions and with some vows, that does matter. But for killing, for instance, it doesn't matter. As long as it's still, if my intention is to recognize as a living being and I kill a living being, then that is what it needs to be. So after recognition, as part of intention, you have motive. So you actually have to have the intent to cause harm or to kill this other being, right? So it has to be intentional in that way. And then lastly, it has to be motivated by one of the delusions, right? So in general, killing is going to be motivated by anger. It's possible for it to be anger mixed with desire or mixed with another delusion, but anger, the wish to cause harm, right? That's the primary definition of anger, is a mind that wishes to cause harm to others. So it's always going to be the motive for killing. So if you don't have the wish to cause harm, and like I said, you kill accidentally, then you don't have the complete intention because you don't have that delusion as part of it either, right? So those are the 3 aspects of intention: recognition, motive, and delusion. Which delusion? So generally, when we say delusion, generally it's going to be one of the 3 root delusions. So ignorance, attachment, or anger. But it could also be a secondary delusion or one of the other afflicted minds as well. But it's going to be related to one of those 3. And then there's the deed itself. That's the third of the 4 aspects. The action, you actually have to, kill someone, do the action, and then you have the completion of the deed, So for instance, they say, if I have the intent to kill you and I stab you, but then I die before you die, then I don't receive the full karmic weight of that deed because it wasn't completed in my lifetime. I mean, I think you're pretty close to having full karmic weight. Let's be honest. Like let's not hope for that. But still, it's not complete because I didn't have that final aspect, right? That's not like a get out of jail free card. You still have put yourself in a bad situation. But it's important that deed has to be completed. And sometimes they add on to that the idea of rejoicing in the completion, right? That has more to do with vows usually than it has to do with a karmic act. But it's the same idea that you have to be appreciative that you did this thing and recognize that you completed this act, right? And so the reason understanding those 4 aspects, or those 4 the 4 aspects of a complete karmic act are important, is because when we're talking about how can a karmic act ripen, and is it going to ripen as a propelling karma or as a completing karma, and is it going to ripen very like in this life immediately, or is it something that I can purify, or all of these things? We have to know how strong it is, how heavy it is. And an incomplete karmic act isn't going to have the same power, isn't going to ripen as strong, right? So we should be avoiding all non-virtue. You should be the goal. This is only a half non-virtue, so it's okay. That's not the goal. But recognizing that any karmic act isn't just black and white. There is gray area, right? You might have a good motivation, but engage in a harmful act by accident, or vice versa. You might have a bad motivation, but then accidentally help someone, right? And so like for example, if every day you walk out of your house and there is a beggar and they just aggravate you and anger you, you don't ever want to give anything to them. And finally you take some rupees and you just throw at them to kind of humiliate them, not because you actually want to help them, but you're just tired and you want to humiliate them. There's still some generosity there, right? The action itself was a small act of generosity. Your mind was negative, so you're going to accumulate non-virtue from that. But there is some small virtue, or at least neutral karmic result, comes from the actual act of generosity, right? So it's not complete in one way or the other. It's going to be mixed, right? And you can see most of our daily activities are mixed in some way. Actually creating a full propelling karma is difficult, right? I remember when we studied this in the monastery, you say, well, if you can't, am I really creating the cause for propelling karmic result with every single action I do? And then there are some teachers who say, you probably create about 8 propelling karmas a day. I have no clue where that number came from, but that's one of the ones that you hear in debate a lot, maybe about 8 a day. I don't have any confidence to the validity of that number, but the point is that not every single one of our actions is going to be creating a propelling karma, because that takes a lot of work, right? Not just non-virtuous, but virtuous as well. That's the important thing. The thing with karma, right, is that it's not just saying what not to do, it's also what to do, right? Not engaging in harmful actions isn't the same as engaging in virtuous actions, right? The mere absence of non-harm isn't the same as actively engaging in not harming someone, right? Or actively engaging in virtue. So if I want to be creating causes that cause me to be reborn as a human, so I have the opportunity to study Dharma, to practice Dharma, to meet with a virtuous friend, and to eventually become a Buddha, it's not like I can just give lip service to my practice. I actually have to create the complete karmic action that will allow me to have the rebirth, that will allow me to continue practicing Dharma, right? And in Tantric Buddhism, we say we can become Buddhas in this very life if we practice Tantra. It's possible, right? If we don't practice Tantra, they say it takes 3 countless great eons. 1 countless great eon to accumulate once you enter into the path. So once you actually achieve the mind of bodhicitta, then it takes 1 countless great eon to accumulate the amount of merit and wisdom that will allow you to have direct realization into the nature of reality. And then it'll take another countless great eon to eliminate all of the afflicted minds and their seeds. And then it'll take another countless great eon to eliminate all of the obscurations to omniscience. So 3 countless great eons if you practice only sutra path, right? But so throughout all of those, you have to be creating the causes over and over and over again to be born in a situation where you can continue practicing Dharma, which means you have to constantly be engaging in virtue, which means you can't just be giving it lip service, because you have to recognize that every one of your virtuous acts has to have a proper basis, proper intention, and then the actual deed has to be done completely, and it has to be finished, and you have to then have some sort of mind of joy at the completion of that, right? In order for it to be a complete propelling karma. So we have to do the work for virtue as well.
Most people in samsara, like people we know and us included, like we're constantly just chasing after like sensual pleasure, like a good meal or a good trip or whatever. So is that neutral karma? It's definitely not non-virtuous.
Unless it's motivated by self-cherishing.
If it is motivated by self-cherishing,
then it definitely has a non-virtuous aspect. Anything motivated by self-cherishing is creating cause for you to be born in samsara over and over again, right? So again, it won't be completely non-virtuous. Like that's the important thing, is that most people we know that are trying to be good people, right? They're creating good karma. And we often look, at least the Buddhist teachers I know, will look at non-Buddhists who are engaged in a different spiritual tradition, who are great people, who are creating good karma, who are living the lives of parallel to bodhisattvas, right? I mean, look at His Holiness Dalai Lama was best friends with Desmond Tutu, right? And you see, and also he met with Merton, who was a famous Jesuit meditator, right? So there are lots of examples of us recognizing other spiritual traditions of people who are incredible beings who are doing good work, who are creating good karma. And it may not be 100% complete. So there may be some neutral karma and some positive karma mixed, right? But if you're chasing happiness for this life, it's always going to be mixed with negative karma, if that is the preoccupation, which is why, we don't want to. It's important when you take bodhisattva vows, some of the branch vows are encouraging you to help discourage non-virtuous behavior in others. And that can be hard when the people in your orbit aren't necessarily Buddhist, right? And no one else in my family is Buddhist. And if I say, don't do this because you're going to create bad karma, they're like, okay, you know what I mean? That's not a helpful way to engage in that relationship, right? So sometimes the best you can do is model appropriate behavior. Or sometimes you can give them suggestions or advice, not using Buddhist language, but you can find other ways to say, like, maybe this isn't the best way about going these things, And I look at contemporary talk therapy and contemporary inner work that people do, and a lot of the methodologies and ideas are parallel to what we do in Buddhism, but they're just using much different modalities to understand it. And they're not the exact same, but they're pointed in the same direction, right? And so for some people, that's what you have to do, because it's not my place to tell people how to behave if they're not my students or if they're not interested in learning about Buddhism. So you have to find that balance, right? How can I be true to my bodhisattva vows, or how can I just be true to my understanding of the Dharma without being an inconvenience to others? Because if I try to push my beliefs on other people that aren't willing to hear it, I could then turn them away from the Dharma, which would be even worse, right? For them to have some sort of mind of anger or blasphemy towards the teachings of the Buddha is much worse than whatever else they could be doing. So finding that balance is difficult, right? Especially with your friends or your family members who aren't Buddhist, and you see them engaging in even not like explicitly harmful action, but like chasing after worldly desire is only going to bring about, it's like drinking salt water. Chasing.
That mosquitoes.
Yeah. That's the hard thing. I mean,
as far as you feel, they're not successful.
But they have the bad thing.
But I will say, for instance, so stopping mosquitoes is a good example. So I do my best to not kill any insects, right? And no one else in my family feels the same way about insects. And so like my nephews and niece have no problem like slapping insects, but they see me not killing them. They see me have an insect bite me and then a mosquito bite me. And instead of slapping it, I lift it away or blow it away. And so they say, why do you do that? And I said, this is what I believe. Like, this is why. And so then, they still kill most of the insects that bite them, but they try a little harder not to, right? And so like by modeling that behavior of doing my best not to slap insects, or when they slap insects, like I often, like you have the little thing like that, like this little cringe, and they see that, and I don't do it intentionally to make them feel bad, but sometimes it's like a gut reaction when you see someone else doing that, and they pick up on that. And so as long as you're not doing it with the intention to manipulate them or to make them feel guilty, then you still have an effect on people, right? But there are some things that, you can also just say, please, when you're in my presence, don't do this sometimes, and then you can see how you can help people around the edges. But the most important thing, again, karma is specific. So we can't control what they experience. All we can control is what we experience. So we do our best to live a life of being a role model. And that is engaging in virtue in and of itself, right?
Yeah, I had a question.
Yeah.
In certain traditions, there is this understanding that your past misdeeds can be wiped off through divine grace. God can forgive your sins. So is there something parallel to that in the Buddhist tradition, that your past karmas can be effaced completely without you having to face the fruits of these karmas?
We say, the Buddha said explicitly, he said, I can't wash off your misdeeds in the Ganges, and I can't give you my own realizations. All I can do is show you the path. So no matter how much we pray, no matter how much the Buddhas want to help us, they can't just wipe away our sins or our misdeeds. But if they could, we wouldn't be suffering, right? if the Buddha could just use magical powers so that we didn't have to experience the results of our negative karma, then we wouldn't be, because the Buddha has pure and unending compassion that is for all sentient beings, right? So they can't just, there's no magic wand, but we can engage in acts of purification, as we were mentioning earlier. So a complete, and hopefully the plan is to discuss this in more detail in the 4th class and go through a practice of doing it, or one possible practice. There's different ways of doing it. But the common practice of purification has 4 aspects. The first one is developing a mind of refuge and bodhicitta, and then developing a strong mind of regret for the negative action you've done. And the regret is really important. It's not the same as guilt. It's not saying I'm a bad person, but it's recognizing that the actions I did are harmful. And then from that mind of regret, you engage in an act of virtue that is serving as to remedy the whatever negative action you is, whatever negative actions you've done in this life and in past lives. And there are different like common things that we do. But any virtuous act is going to serve as a remedy. But there are some common ones that we believe are maybe more powerful than others. And then you commit to not engaging in that harmful action again in the future. So those 4, we call them the 4 opponent powers. By practicing those, you are purifying the negative karma, so then it won't ripen. Or at least it'll ripen in a diminished capacity. You're stopping its ability to ripen in a big way, right? But you have to actually be practicing them. So if you have a very weak mind of regret, that's not going to do a whole lot, right? Or if you don't actually engage in the virtuous activity, it's not doing a whole lot. So there is a way to prevent them from ripening, but it involves your work. It's not someone else just, waving a magic wand.
If you've done a negative action in this life that we know of, it's easy to regret it, but the negative actions in past life, we don't really remember.
Yeah.
So when we do this for opponent powers, we generally think of that we may have done all of this. Is that how?
I mean, not may have, we have. Then that is part of understanding. And that again is how, if you don't, you have to develop some sort of confidence in past and future lives to have confidence in the law of karma. But the fact that you experience difficulty in this life shows that you have created negative causes for that difficulty, right? So any obstacles you face in this life, physical difficulty, emotional difficulty, any obstacles you have are the result of negative karma you've created ripening. So the fact that you experience those show that you have created some negative karma. So based on that logic, you say, well, if I know I'm experiencing this, the likelihood, since I've been reborn in samsara over and over again, I'm experiencing the result of some negative karma now, there has to be more negative karma I've created. Or I look at my actions in this life, and I am doing my best in this life to be a good person, to practice a spiritual path, to be kind-hearted and all these things, and yet I'm still engaging in non-virtue. And therefore, in the past, I must have done that as well. So you use logic and reasoning to develop conviction. And then that conviction is what allows you to develop regret. And so when you try to develop regret, it has to be based on that conviction, and that conviction comes from study. So again, study, contemplation, meditation. You have to go through the process of studying it, developing conviction, and then analyzing it, seeing if it makes sense, getting rid of your doubts, and then becoming familiar with it. So you actually have confidence in it, right? But the amount you purify is going to be directly related to how strong your regret is. So you have to be able to develop that regret. I will say our tradition, the Tibetans, we have it a little easier than some of the other traditions. Like, so twice a month, monks and nuns engage in what's called sojong. So it's a purification process. We purify all of our vows that we've broken. So as a fully ordained monk, I have 253 vows. Novice monks and nuns have 36 vows. And so twice a month on the 15th and the 30th of the Tibetan calendar, we do this process of purification. And it involves all these same steps, right? Of recognizing we've engaged in harmful actions, developing a mind of regret, and so forth. If you look at like how it used to be back in the day, when I confessed a negative action, like I would go to a senior monk and be like, I did this thing. Not just like my past life ones, like, oh, I did this thing in this life. Like yesterday, I did this thing, right? And that brings a much stronger sense of shame and embarrassment, which makes that regret much more powerful. But now we just have a big group community where you say, I know I've done all these things. And it makes it much harder actually to develop a mind of regret, because you aren't held as accountable when there's 1,000 monks together just reciting the same prayer over and over again. It's all on you to develop that regret in your own self. Whereas if I'm coming to you and actually admitting, oh, yesterday I did this thing, then that regret comes much easier, right? So in absence of that one-on-one confession, which the Tibetans don't really do as much anymore, we have to really work to develop a mind of regret and develop minds of shame and embarrassment, which are just types of regret depending on the circumstances, right? So it's important. But it is also, and I know I've said this to all of you before, but as Westerners, I think it's important to hear that it's not the same thing as guilt. And it's so easy to develop a mind of regret or shame or embarrassment and have that turn into, I am a bad person because I did this thing. And that is not helpful. That
distinguish between the action and the person.
It is the distinguishing between the action and the person, but I can't speak for Indian culture, but I know at least the culture in the West is like guilt is like a big thing. And like we are taught to be ashamed of ourselves, right? It's one of the ways like parents control their children. It's one of the ways religions control people, is that you are a bad person because you did these things. And that is how they try to keep you in line, right? And that is not a useful way to think about your actions, right? Because then that actually prevents you from any sort of positive growth, because you're acting out of fear and not out of a wish to be virtuous. And it creates a negative understanding of how you exist.
That's not so.
Maybe not. I don't.
Maybe it's a very Christian thing. It comes from the Christian notion of sin and being a
Christian. They joke about Jewish grandmothers are really good at guilt, is the joke, at least in America. But I mean, it definitely is a Christian idea that I know a lot of, there's a term in Tibetan that is a digpa that I always translate as negativity, but it's sometimes translated as sin. And the reason a lot of translators don't like to use the word sin is because sin does have these Christian connotations that are heavier than what we mean and ascribe a type of personhood to that activity that doesn't exist in Buddhism. So I don't like to use the word sin, but sometimes it is like the easiest word, because negativity is like a mouthful and it's a little harder to wrangle sometimes. But so some of it could just be from Western context. So I don't know the contemporary Indian culture enough to say if guilt is a motivating factor in how you live your life. But there is, I've seen people engage in trying to gather my thoughts before I blather. I know people who have for instance, the way the Indian relationship with their parents and with their family, and they allow their deference to their parents sometimes to allow them to continue in situations that they wouldn't otherwise, right? And so that also has to do with feeling guilty about not behaving as an appropriate child should, right? And I'm not saying reject your parents. I think it's actually much healthier to have a close relationship within families than the individualism we have in the West. But like there is guilt about your role as a family member and as a provider, or as, many of these things. There is definitely still ideas of guilt. Definitely, yeah. Obligation and duties. And I don't think those are always bad things, right? I'm not saying that like obligation and duties are bad things, but when those obligations and duties are forced on you from culture and from society, and you're told you're a bad person if you don't do them correctly, then that is not a useful way to engage them, right? Even if they are beneficial obligations. Like, the Buddha says, like, one of the most important things we can do is be respectful towards our parents, right? Like engaging in virtue towards your parents are some of those virtuous actions you can do outside of engaging in virtue towards your teachers, your Buddhist teachers, right? So like there's a lot of deference to parents. I mean, Buddhism comes from an Indian tradition, so that makes sense, right? But having that forced on you from the outside and then saying, I'm a bad person because I don't do that, is a type of guilt that isn't useful. So Jen, it's really just dividing the deed and the action. I mean, the deed and the person. Okay, so many lists. So karma has 4 general aspects. And then we already talked about, and then there are 4 general types of karmic results. And then there are 4 aspects or components to a complete karmic action, right? Or 6, depending on if you realize that intention is really 3, has 3 subdivisions. That helps us recognize that not all karma is created equal. That's the important thing about it. Not all karma is created equal. And from my perspective, that's most important for when we're trying to create merit and when we're trying to understand the negative karma we created. But again, we're not using it as a shortcut that it's okay to kill an insect because the basis is less than killing a human, right? So we're not using it as an excuse, but we're using it as a way of understanding. Okay, because then that gets into the next idea is if not all karma is equal, then we say, well, some karmic acts are heavier than others. Both in the fact that if they are complete in all four aspects, but also there are other ways that could cause a karmic act to be heavier or lighter. Okay, and so what makes a karmic act heavy or lighter? So first we'd say they're heavy or light depending on their nature. Okay, and so if we're looking at the 10 non-virtuous actions, which we talked about those today, yeah. So I'll just go through those really quickly. Maybe we'll talk more about these later. But the 10 non-virtuous actions, right? There are the 3 actions of body, the 4 actions of speech, and the 3 actions of mind, right? And these actions are always non-virtuous. That's why they're called the 10 non-virtuous karmas. Again, we say the 10 non-virtuous actions, but really the word is 10 non-virtuous karmas because the word for karma and action is the same word in Sanskrit and in Tibetan. And in English, it just becomes difficult to say 10 non-virtuous karmas. What does that mean? It shows that karma is action, right? So what are the 3 non-virtuous actions of body? And let's do it in order. So first is killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct, right? And I say do it in order because they go from heaviest to lightest, right? So when I say heavy by nature, those 3 go in sequence. Heaviest is killing, and then stealing, and then sexual misconduct, okay? So those are the 3 non-virtues of body. And so when we say that the 3 non-virtuous actions, they're always non-virtuous. It's impossible to engage in one of those 3 activities and have it not be non-virtuous, okay? It's by its very nature non-virtuous. Now, what are the 4 of speech?
Lying, harsh speech, divisive speech, meaningless speech.
Yes, but not the right order. So lying is first,
Divisive speech.
and then divisive speech is second, and then harsh speech, and then idle speech or gossip, right? And again, the order is important simply because the first one is the heaviest and gossip is the lightest. So again, a karmic act can be lighter or heavier by nature, and they go in that sequence, right? So those lying obviously is pretty clear. Divisive speech. Now, specifically, this is often talking about causing a division in a Sangha community, but it is any speech that is intent to cause some sort of bifurcation. So not just in a Sangha community, though that is the heaviest manifestation of it, but even in a friendship or a partnership, trying to cause division like that is still a type of divisive speech.
Politically, sometimes.
Yeah, politically as well. It's hard. I mean, it's very hard to engage in politics and engage in virtue at the same time. Very, very difficult. Unfortunately, there are very few that can do it. But yes. Again, divisive speech, it has to do with wanting to cause a division. So if I am supporting a political party, for instance, or a political idea or a political ideology, me supporting one thing and not supporting something else isn't the same as divisive speech, right? Or even me saying this political ideology or people that are following this political party are causing harm, that isn't the same thing as divisive speech. It can be if my point is to create division. If that is my intention, is to create this division, then it can be divisive speech. But if it's also a fair assessment of reality and I'm doing it with a good intention, it doesn't have to be divisive speech. So we have to be careful of our motivation, right? And that brings us to harsh speech. That's another important one where motivation matters. So what do we mean by harsh speech or coarse speech, as sometimes say? And some people just say, well, any like vulgar speech is harsh speech. That's not true. Harsh speech is speech that is intended to harm others, right? Speech that is intended to cause people to be upset or to have some sort of negative reaction, right? So I can be giving you what sounds like a compliment, but it's really harsh speech, right? Let me say backhanded compliments, right? Yeah, well, sarcasm, but also just like, oh, look, you actually look really nice today, right? Like that is not nice to say that. Like this thing, you usually don't look nice, but today you do. So like if I'm saying something like that, I'm saying it sounds, the words are nice words, but what I'm really doing is trying to make you feel bad about yourself, right? So that's harsh speech. So if I use vulgarity, it could be harsh speech, especially if I'm doing it in such a way to cause people's minds to be disturbed, but it doesn't have to be, right? Yeah.
Like my mom criticizes me.
Yeah, so that's good. Probably. It's probably harsh speech. And it's probably one of the times where it's not useful to say, hey, you're engaging in virtue. Probably will not win you any favors, but also I say that joking, but it also isn't like helpful, right? To be like, hey, doing that's bad, but that's why we need to avoid criticizing others when, let me take that back. When we are offering criticism to others, we have to make sure it's motivated in their benefit and our benefit. And we are doing it in a skillful way. So for instance, I was given, an example someone gave me is like, putting up water bowls. There's a way to make water bowl offerings, right? And if I come in here and there's a bunch of people here doing setup before the teaching starts, and I see them doing water bowl offerings, but they're not doing it correctly. And I just go up in front of everyone and I say, hey, that's not the right way to do it. That's helping them in the sense that my intent is to show them the right way to do this offering so they can create more merit, so they can whatever, be part of it. But it's also embarrassing them in front of a lot of people, where there's a skillful way to do that same thing, where when they're not in front of a large crowd, be like, I saw you doing water bowl offerings. There is a system that we usually do, and these are the reasons to do it. If you're interested, I'd be happy to show it to you, right? So there are ways to criticize and to offer positive feedback that aren't harmful, but they can be. So it's more about our intention and being skillful, right? So harsh speech is non-skillful speech that is intended to harm. And then idle speech, gossip, this is the hardest one. It's hard to believe that gossip is always going to create non-virtue, but it is, right? Okay, so then what are the 3 non-virtuous actions of mind? So we have the 3 of body, 4 of speech, and 3 of mind. That makes 10. What are those 3?
Covetous, malice, ignorance.
So covetousness, malice, and then wrong views. So not just ignorance. And that's a pedantic difference, but usually ignorance, at least fundamental ignorance, is ignorance of the nature of reality, which is just self-grasping.
Should
But
that be higher up than covetousness?
so these 3, they go in reverse order. So the 3 of speech, of mind, the lightest is first and the heaviest is last. It's hard to find a reason for that. To be honest, this is where the scholar in me comes. So I think most of you know that I graduated from Harvard Divinity School. And as I was leaving there, they started a program to allow Asian monks and nuns to come to the school for free and not pay anything and do a 1-year certificate program. And then if they wanted to, they could roll that into a 2-year master's degree. And one of the monks I live with, who is Geshe, he's also a tulku, he's incredibly smart. He speaks like 4 languages and is, really, really phenomenal. He enrolled in Harvard. He graduated last year. And he was writing a paper for one of the professors I know, for one of my advisors. And it was on this very thing. Like, why do the 3 non-virtues of mind go from lightest to heaviest, where the others go from heaviest to lightest? And we developed a really interesting reason for it that had to do with the way the Buddha taught and the way the Buddha gave instructions to his earliest disciples. But it was very theoretical. It's not something that is easily explained away. So I can't tell you why. I can tell you a very academic essay that we wrote for it. But otherwise, all that's important for our purposes is to know covetous is the least, and then malice, and then wrong views. So the reason I corrected ignorance to wrong views is because generally when we use the term ignorance, we mean self-grasping. But wrong views are such as saying the law of karma doesn't exist, or it is invalid, or saying that the 3 jewels are not actually sources of refuge. Those are considered wrong views that are the heaviest of the mental non-virtues. Which shows why, if you believe that karma isn't valid, that is the heaviest of mental non-virtues you could have. How many sentient beings don't believe in karma? Right? Because they don't have access to it in any way. So it shows how easy it is to create non-virtue without meaning to, right? Because that's the heaviest of the mental non-virtues, is wrong view, lokta, they say. So the first way a karma can be heavier, the first way a karma can be heavier or lighter. I don't know if you caught my Boston accent coming out there. A karma. Sorry. The first way a karma can be heavier or lighter is by nature. So the 3 of body go from heaviest to lightest. The 4 of speech go from heaviest to lightest. And then the 3 of mind go from lightest to heaviest. That's the first way a karma can be heavier or lighter. The second way is through the actual intention. So the stronger your intention is, then the heavier that karma will be, right? So, that's pretty self-explanatory, right? And then the deed itself, the means that you go about doing the deed, can make it heavier or lighter. So if you're killing someone, just to stab someone versus torturing them, one of those is heavier than the other, right? And the first example they always give is with killing, and that's because of the 10 non-virtues. That's the first one they list, and it's also the easiest, right? It's easy to give examples that go with killing, and also it's the most removed from our everyday life because most of us don't go around killing people. But so it's useful to use as an example because it makes it very clear, but then you have to do the work of trying to apply it to all the other non-virtuous actions as well. But so I'm going to continue using the example of killing, but that's easiest. So a karma can be heavier or lighter by the nature of the actual deed, by the intention, the strength of the intention, and by the deed itself or the means of accomplishing the deed. But then it can be heavier or lighter depending on the basis or the object. So there's a distinction between killing one of your parents versus killing someone who isn't your parents, right? Killing one of your parents is one of the 5 deeds of immediate retribution, right? You know, killing your mother, killing your father, killing an arhat, intentionally drawing blood from the Buddha, or causing a schism in the Sangha community are 5 deeds. Negative karma is so heavy that you are immediately reborn in lower realms, right? That's because of the power of the object that's receiving your action.
I have 2 questions here. Here, killing is not restricted only to fellow human beings, but it includes all sentient beings, right? And recently I attended a talk by a Theravada Bhante, and I asked him this question, and he was talking about metta and loving kindness. And then I said, okay, loving kindness should also, lead you to vegetarianism. And if you love all sentient beings, and then he said I hope I'm not misquoting him, but he was saying something to the effect that it's not, I didn't agree with it, but this is what he said. I could, of course, disagree in public. But he said that, okay, if you're eating meat which you buy from a supermarket, that's not a negative thing because you're not killing the animal yourself. It was killed by somebody else, and you didn't, involve yourself in the killing of that particular animal. So it's not a negative karma. But of course, I didn't agree with it.
Yeah.
But what would you say here?
It's important to hear, my perspective is that I became vegan before I became Buddhist. So my perspective may be skewed, but also following in the shadow of Shabkar, who is a Tibetan, great Tibetan yogi and practitioner. He talks about, and what I kind of think of as an ecosystem of violence. So a lot of Tibetans even will say, if you buy meat from a store, they look at the Vinaya rules, the rules for a monk or nun. So if I'm begging for my daily food, and a lot of the Theravada monks are going to be using that as their example, I can't accept meat that I know was killed for me. It has to be pure in the 3 ways. So that means if I know this was killed for me or because of me, then I can't accept it because it's impure. But if it happened to be killed anyway, it's not violating that Vinaya rule. So that is where that monk is coming from. Now, contemporary Mahayana practitioners, a lot of them say, that's true if you are begging food. That's not the same as going to a store and buying food. Because if you're going to a store and purchasing this meat, you are participating in a larger ecosystem where these animals would not be killed if there were not beings who were purchasing their flesh, right? And so in that regard, that particular animal maybe wasn't killed because of your purchasing, but you are part of a larger ecosystem that is encouraging these animals to be bred and killed for the purpose of their consumption. Not everyone agrees with that. Okay, so not all Buddhists are going to agree. That's my perspective from the teachers and from my study. And, sometimes it's very hard for people to be vegetarian. And so my teachers all say you shouldn't force vegetarianism on people because people have habits, they have customs, they have traditions that can be hard. So the Dalai Lama, for instance, back in the 70s, he tried to be vegetarian and it did not go well. And he got very, very sick, in part because he stopped eating meat, but then he didn't replace it with anything. But that's neither here nor there. So what he did, and I don't know if he still does this, but what he's done for a long time of his life is he would not eat meat every other day. And as a result of that, he said, I spend half my year vegetarian and half the year not vegetarian. But the days I don't eat meat, I don't accidentally not eat meat. I make a vow not to eat meat. And it's a very explicit mental act not to consume meat on those days. But then on other days I do, because I realize that my health and my ability to meditate, my ability to practice, my ability to study is somewhat dependent on me getting the proper nutrients. And for my body, that involves consuming animal products. Okay. And so we don't encourage, or my teachers don't encourage to force vegetarianism on people, but we do encourage you to try it if you're able to. And even if you aren't able to set some part of your schedule where you are intentionally vegetarian And it's pretty easy in India where there's dal for every meal you could eat. It's very, and since the Brahmins already have a tradition of vegetarianism, there's a lot of vegetarian options in general in Indian cuisine. But so we don't force vegetarianism, but we do encourage it. From my perspective, is consuming meat that was bred for the purpose of being killed to be eaten is participating in it, and you're accumulating some karma, I believe. If the animal died a natural death, so in Tibet, they traditionally wouldn't kill any animals, but animals die all the time, and then they'd consume it. Then that died a natural death. It wasn't bred for the purposes of being eaten, and then it died a natural death, and then they ate that meat, then that wouldn't be accumulating negative karma. There's also questions that are different, and I don't have the answer for it, but there are some traditions that say that, well, we do say that, again, your karma is heavy based on the basis. So it's a heavier negative karma to kill a human than it is to kill an animal than it is to kill an insect, right? Because of that sentient being's capacity to engage in a spiritual practice and to move up towards closer to Buddhahood, the ones with greater potential, it's a heavier negative karma to kill them. Okay. So, but if you don't do anything to purify that karma, and again, this gets into karma mathematics and karma calculus that I can't verify with my own experience, but Choe Khor Sum Ling says, if you kill a louse, or a tick or a louse, and you don't do anything to purify that karma, you don't have any regret, you did it intentionally, but you don't have any regret, you don't do anything to purify it, then in 8 days, it's the equivalent, you've accumulated the equivalent karma of killing a human being. Right? So I don't know the calculus on that, but they talk about that when they talk about how karma increases, right? If you don't do something to purify it. So there are some traditions that say it's better to kill like cows or other large animals because then one sentient being, their flesh feeds many more people. Then there are other traditions that say it's better to eat smaller animals like chickens or fish because since they're smaller, they're farther away from Buddhahood, and therefore there's less karma for killing them. I don't agree with either of those positions, but you look at, countries like Sri Lanka are very heavy meat eaters. When I went to Sri Lanka, every single dish, even the vegetables, had meat in them. So, it's just a different cultural tradition and how they engage in Buddhism. From my side, I think that it's important to do everything you can in your power to remove yourself from any system of violence that you can. For me, that means doing my best not to consume animal products in any way. And I have the physical constitution and the means to do that. Not everyone does. So you have to do the best you can do, right? And that is the most important thing with our Dharma practice, is we're doing the best we can do. And maybe the best we can do in a year from now is different than the best we can do now, and that's fine. We have to look at our situation and say, what can I do now that is going to point me towards Buddhahood? And let me do that to the best of my ability. And anywhere I have weak spots or difficulty, I'm going to work on those and try to improve them, right? And I'm not going to say I'm a bad person for not being perfect right now. That's important, right? So I'm not going to be openly criticizing of this Theravada monk, but he was probably referencing, or his analysis was based on the ways meat can be pure or non-pure when you are begging for food. And that is often applied to meat that you buy at a store, but many of my teachers, and the Tibetan tradition at least, doesn't always agree that those are equivalent comparisons. But that's where he was coming from. And he isn't alone in thinking that. I think there is a question online. I can't see the chat, so you are welcome to ask a question. I see someone has their hand up. If you unmute your mic. Okay.
Want me to read the question?
Yeah, if you want to. Or actually, well, why don't I finish this and then hopefully we'll come back to it. We're almost out of time, so I want to go through the other ways that it can be heavy or light. So it can be heavy or light by nature, it can be heavy or light by intention, by the means or the actual deed itself, and then by the object or the basis, as we say, and then by the frequency. So again, the more you do something, the easier it becomes. It actually creates heavier karma each time, the more and more you do it, So it's not like the same number of points every time. The more you do something, the more points you get, for better or worse. Again, the reason these are all important is because it works for positive karma as well, right? And then the last one is having a lack of an antidote. So if you engage in a harmful action, but you immediately have a mind of regret for it, that makes it much less powerful, right? Even if it's an incredibly heavy negative action, if you immediately regret it, then that neuters it right away. Maybe.
eliminate it, reduce it.
Exactly. It's not going to eliminate it entirely. You can eliminate it entirely through more practice, but just that simple mind of regret isn't going to eliminate it, but it's going to stop it from growing, and it's going to reduce its power. So that's the difference between lighter and heavier. And then, like we mentioned before, the depth of your regret is going to mediate how much lighter or heavier it is, you know? And then, so those are all that they teach in reference to negative actions, how a negative karma can be heavier or lighter. For positive karma, they teach the same, but then they add onto it. Well, first off, they say that those six, right? Nature, intention, deed, object, frequency, and lack of antidote, they operate independently. And what that is to say is that it can be heavy by nature and also heavy by intention, maybe light by means, but heavy by frequency. You know what I mean? Like they don't operate one-to-one, which just goes to show that there isn't like, there are many different ways that a single karmic action can have all different types of results, right? And so when we study karma and we say that, and if I make a statement like you being reborn in an area where you experience poverty and it's a slum and people are always stealing from you is the environmental result of you engaging in the act of stealing in a previous lifetime. That's the environmental completing karma. The only way I know that is through different lineage teachers who have developed levels of realization and insight where they can actually say that. Because there's so many facets of karma that it's above my ability to actually realize those direct causes, you know? When you have higher levels of realization, you can say, oh, your birth in this lifetime in this place is due to this action in this past lifetime. But that's technically possible, but you have to have the mind of a Buddha to be able to do that. So for us, we have to have developed some confidence and conviction in these causes and results based on our conviction in the teachings themselves, because we don't have the realizations to actually realize, to see those on our own. But the other way we develop that conviction is not just by the teachings, but also by looking at conventional cause and effect, right? That isn't necessarily karma, but is parallel to the action of karma. So we look at conventional karma, cause and effect, and by realizing how conventional cause and effect works in the world, that allows us to develop some conviction that karma is going to work in a very similar way, right? But it does involve a little bit of faith, right? Not blind faith, but faith based on our experience and our observations, because we're not, at least at this point in our lives, going to have the ability to know specifically these are the specific actions, right? I don't know, for me, that never really mattered. Like, that sounds flippant, but like, for me to know the specific actions I did to cause these difficulties I'm experiencing, it doesn't matter. As much as I know the general negative actions that result in this type of response. So I don't have to know 3 lifetimes ago I killed a fly, and as a result, I'm experiencing this now. That, from my personal mind, isn't useful. But I know the types of actions that cause these types of results, so I know how not to behave. And I know the type of actions that create the causes, or excuse me, create the type of results I want, so I know how to behave. That's more powerful for me. And the specifics, I'm willing to like understand them later as I get farther along my path. So before we end, I'll have a little more time for questions if we have. I did want to add that, so we talked about the 10 non-virtues. The 10 virtues are the opposites of those, right? But the important thing to recognize is with the 10 virtues, they're not the mere absence of the non-virtuous activity. It's an active, intentional, an active intention to not engage in that non-virtue, right? So that's the reason vows are so important. So there is a difference between not killing and taking a vow not to kill and then fulfilling that vow. Because of the 3 types of action, of body, speech, and mind, we say actions of mind are the most important because they propel all of our activities, right? So actively having a mind that says, I'm going to go about my day, actively avoiding causing harm to other sentient beings is incredibly powerful, right? As opposed to, I mean, most of the time we go about our day not killing or harming sentient beings. Like that's what we do most of the time. But then if we do that intentionally, it makes it more powerful, you know? So as opposed to it being neutral, it becomes a virtuous activity, right? So if you have the intention not to kill, non-killing becomes virtuous. If you don't have that mindset, then it's a neutral, you know, because it just so happens that you didn't kill anything that day, right? So the 10 non-virtues, excuse me, the 10 virtues are simply the opposites of the 10 non-virtues, but they aren't the mere absence of non-virtue. They're active. That's important. And so for that regard, most of them are going to be active in the mental sense, right? That you're actively choosing not to kill something, or actively choosing not to lie, not to steal, not to engage in sexual misconduct.
That's a negative thing. What about saying it in a positive way? Like it says not to harm someone. You can say it positively by serving someone or helping someone.
Well, so then that is the next step, right? So that is 100% correct, but it is a separate thing.
Okay.
So then there is the 10 virtuous actions are the opposites of the non-virtue, but then we add on to that and say, not only am I going to not harm, I'm going to go out of my way to help, right? So that is additional, right? That's going one step beyond, which you can easily recognize the benefit of all the 10. You can follow them to their logical conclusion in that same way, right? And that is taking a mental action and making it physical in many cases, right? Yes, Gyalten.
So we have this collective karma, right?
Mhm.
So say a group of us have collected the karma to say see some flowers today in the center, okay? And then we go off. We go. Two of us go off, and then the remaining people are here. So that karma, like the two people who went, their karmic imprint is like finished, right? Now to see the flowers in the center, the people here are still seeing the flowers. So is that how collective karma results in like different experiences for the people?
Depends on the collective karma we're talking about, right? So the collective karma of like seeing flowers, as you mentioned, I'm not sure what kind of collective karma would create that. Whereas collective karma is more about creating conditions for things. So for instance, collective karma is what causes all of us to come together in this group today, because we've had some experience in the past where we have engaged in virtuous behavior together in some regard. And that causes a way for us to then come together in this life, right? So that's a type of collective karma. You can look at collective karma also as like when an area experiences an earthquake or a flood or something like that, all of those beings in that place are experiencing the result of some sort of collective karma. I don't know if it would be as granular as like you seeing a flower today and me seeing it and then it's exhausted when I leave. I'm not quite sure. I think collective karma, I think of more as a bigger picture kind of thing that's about environmental conditions. And so, we have flowers here at the center. Each of us is experiencing those flowers differently. So for instance, we have these beautiful garlands, right? That are fake flowers, they're plastic flowers. Some of us may see those and think those are beautiful. Then they are making the center beautiful. I really appreciate them. And every time I see them, I offer them to all the Buddhas and they're great. Other people might look at them and say, those are like tacky plastic flowers, right? And those are two valid experiences. So the flowers are the same, but it's depending on our karmic mind and our karmic experience, how we relate to those, right? So the act of seeing something or being in the presence of a thing isn't the same thing as our karmic experience of that thing. So the karmic experience is different than the physical reality, or the karma is the experience of reality. Put it that way, right? As I mentioned the other day, like the fan blowing air, if I experience it as refreshing and cool, is due to a karmic experience, whereas someone else might feel it as like annoying and drying and bothersome. But the physical reality is the same. Collective karma, I think, more about large-scale events. So I don't have an exact answer for you. Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, Honorable Lekden, what is the virtuous opposite of gossip?
Of gossip is using your speech wisely. So engaging in beneficial speech, right? And so if we look at the 4 actions of speech, so we have not telling lies. So the opposite of that obviously is committing yourself not to lie, but then also engaging in truthful speech, right? Intentionally truthful speech. The opposite of this divisive speech is unifying speech that is bringing people together in a healthy way, not bringing them together over harmful things, which unfortunately there's a lot of speech about that. Like, politics, it's easy to create an enemy, right? So like to say this is the bad person, and that is unifying, like not just in politics. One of the most common ways to create an in-group is to identify an out-group, right? And then once you identify an out-group, you cohese.
That's divisive speech.
Right. So actually what it is divisive. It seems like it's unifying, but what you're really doing is divisive. But so unifying speech would be the opposite of divisive speech, but it is tricky. You have to be careful. And then the opposite of harsh speech, obviously, again, is not just speaking flattering words, but it's words that are intended to cause benefit, right? And then the opposite of gossip would be using speech in a mindful way. So either engaging in Dharma instruction or Dharma advice, but also just speech that is encouraging people to practice in virtue, right? And again, it doesn't have to be using Buddhist language. It doesn't have to be using any of the kind of vocabulary that we're talking about here, but encouraging someone to do good deeds is virtuous speech. That is the opposite of gossip and now. But it's important to remember also it is the mind that is refraining from gossip as well, right? So that's where we got into that distinction between just the vow not to do a thing or the commitment not to do a thing and then supplementing it with something else. Those are both two aspects of it.
Yes.
Mhm.
We have a balcony and then lots of fans there. And I have to clean it every now and then. And then I sweep up the leaves and the mud and the dust and see a lot of fans there. And it really bothers me when I sweep them up and put it in
Mhm.
like a bag. So I don't know how to escape it because I mean I do clean it a lot lesser than I used to. Yeah, I brought it up during the 14 days of what is that? 14
Miracles.
days. Yeah, in when Sushita held a talk with Venerable Robina, she said you could like recite some sort of a mantra to.
Yeah.
So
So
I know those ants are going to die
mhm.
because I'm separating them from their communities and
Mhm.
probably never going to find their way back from the bag and.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things. It's difficult, right? Living in the world is difficult. I had this explicit question when I was in Boston to our teacher there, and I said, I'm removing. We had to not this same question, but we were cleaning the center and we had to destroy a bunch of cobwebs. And I said, this is preventing the spider from its ability to get food or whatever, even though it getting food is killing other sentient beings, but I'm depriving it of that. And he's like, yeah, that's not killing it. And I was like, well, I'm creating the conditions for it not to live. And he's like, it's not quite the same. So first off, recognize that what you're doing is not killing the ants, right? And yes, you are separating them from their home and giving them difficult situations, but it's not the same as killing them. So that's one thing, just to recognize, like to be clear about what actions you're doing. But then we live in reality and we have to deal, like you can't allow your house to be overcome with ants. That is an inappropriate way for you to live and an inappropriate thing to do to your neighbors and to your partner and to other people you live with, right? And again, if you were a bodhisattva, maybe you could, right? If you had a high level of practice and realization, then you could let your whole house be overrun by insects and it wouldn't be a problem. We're not there yet. So Rabina's advice is one of the ones that you often hear, Venerable Rabina, is that you do the best you can. So you create as little harm as possible. You do as much as you can to be as non-disruptive to their life cycle as possible. And then you try to give them at least some good imprints in the process. So recite Dharma mantras or do any of these kind of virtuous activities. Or for instance, if you have a statue of the Buddha or a stupa or something, bring that out with you and bring them on like circumambulation around that before you then get rid of the bag or whatever you're doing. So at least you're creating some sort of positive imprint that you are offsetting the non-virtuous actions in some way. And then most important though, developing a strong mind of regret, right? Because if you have to engage in this activity because you're a person living in the world and you have worldly responsibilities, then you have to do it. But develop a strong mind of regret and you have your mind as an intention, not an intention to kill these insects, but to clean your space for the better of all the sentient beings that are living there. So it's a more productive and healthy space. And recognizing that by causing harm, that's not your intention, but it is a side effect. And then developing a regret with regard to that is the best we can often do.
I'm doing it then like developing mind of regret is like a joke.
I mean, it isn't a joke if you can actually develop it. Like that's the question is it really a mind of regret or are you just paying lip service? I agree. But the thing is, you're in between a rock and a hard place, Like I had oh, it's already 8. Okay. Quick story though. We had a center member when I was in Boston who got a bunch of chickens. and they built a chicken coop in their backyard and had like a flock of chickens. Or not a flock, what do you say? A group of chickens, whatever it may be, for eggs, for the purpose of getting their eggs. And they thought they were like being really beneficial because they were like free range, at least in America, chickens are kept in what are called battery cages for their eggs quite often. And it's really awful. So these really, really small cages where they clip off their claws and their beaks so they can't hurt each other, and put a dozen of them in a cage where they don't have any room to move. And then wait until about half of them die. And then when half of them are dead, they take the other half and put them in a new cage. And the cages are just piled on top of each other. And it's really, really disgusting and awful. So like, this is free range. They can go wherever they want. They have, we're doing good by these chickens. And our teacher was like, well, you're keeping them enslaved and you're keeping them behind cages. So ultimately you are causing the enslavement of a sentient being. So it's not good and you shouldn't do it. And at this point, they'd already committed to having these chickens. So they're like, we'll do the best we can. Then the chickens got lice. And they had to go about killing all these lice because all the chickens got infested with not lice, but like a mite, some sort of mite that chickens can get. And if they didn't get rid of the mites, all the chickens would die because it's that difficult of a condition for the chicken. So all of a sudden they had to decide, am I going to kill all these mites or am I going to let all my chickens die? And my teacher's just like, you are the one that got chickens. Like, you put yourself in a position that made it more difficult for you, right? So they put themselves in that position. You obviously didn't put yourself in the position of having ants. But what you can do is then try to create the conditions to prevent the ants from coming, if you're possible. And then you do the best you can do, unfortunately. So it's like similar for my puppies. I have to give them anti-tick medicine, right? And anti-flea tick medicine. And I give them the medicine that you give them once a month. So if they have any ticks or lice or fleas on them, it'll kill them. But if you give them the medicine every month, it prevents new ones from coming. So as long as you stay on top of it, you're not killing new insects. You're creating inhospitable conditions so new insects don't come, right? So if there's anything you can do to prevent the ants from coming or to decrease it, then you try to do that as best you can and try to work with what you've got, unfortunately.
Bhante, we're going to have a question related to what you said. A relative of mine, relative means a person whom I know very close, right? She has cats and she's a vegetarian as of now, but she feeds cats food.
Yeah.
Okay, because cats don't eat vegetables or dal or whatever. So if
Cats can't survive on vegetarian diet.
yeah. So is it like, is she doing wrong by giving them cat food which consists of meat and chicken and stuff?
Well, again, wrong isn't the right idea, right? Like, right and wrong are very nebulous. But the difficulty with cats is, as Shanti said, cats, they don't create, what is it? There's some chemical that
Taurine.
No, taurine. Thank you. They don't create taurine on their own, whereas most other mammals can, and humans and dogs and others can. So if you don't create taurine on your own, you need to get it from animal sources because it doesn't exist in most plant sources. So cats cannot be vegetarian and healthy, whereas dogs can. They don't like to, but like they're physiologically they can. So when you have a cat, you have to feed it food that is flesh, and so you're going to be creating some negative karma in regards to that. And the best you can do is try to minimize it as much as you can. It's not like 100% pure.
So the main thing would be not to keep a cat as a pet, right?
Ideally, yes. But then if there's a cat that's in a difficult circumstance, you're right, and you have the opportunity to provide it a loving and healthy home where it can survive. And also you think that cats are horrific killers. Like, the amount of birds and animals they kill is huge. I remember there was a study that was done maybe a decade ago or so in Canada where they put like GoPros on a bunch of cats, wild cats, and the amount of birds and mice they kill for fun, not for food, just for fun. And they would torture them and just watch them die. Like, cats are sociopaths. So by keeping a cat indoors, especially, and not letting it go about, you're preventing that cat from creating more negative karma, and you're giving it a much more comfortable life if you're saving it or rescuing it, right? So you have to balance. There is virtue there, but then in order to keep that cat alive, you have to give it flesh to eat. So nothing is going to be 100%, but that goes back to karma isn't black or white. It is always mixed. So if we are doing the best we can and we say, this is like, I don't live in an ideal world. So I have to say, what is the best options I have available to me and do my best to maximize virtue and minimize non-virtue. And that's kind of the best we can do. Ideally, you wouldn't keep a cat, but if cats are suffering and you have a chance to give it a better life, then why would you not do that? So unfortunately. Okay. Cats are always a good way to end a discussion. So there is a hand raise online. You're welcome to ask the question if you want. You have to unmute your mic. But
Hello.
yes, hello.
Hello. Good evening, Venerable.
Yes.
So I have a few questions.
Okay.
So one of my questions is that since the topic under the discussion is karma, and as it is, defined very clearly in Buddhism as well, that we suffer because of our karma. Like Buddha also mentioned in the Dhammapada, you do good and good follows you, and if you do bad, bad follows you. So one of the questions which I had was like, so sometimes we think so too much, negative thoughts, and because of the negative thinking, we get hard sensations in our body, like heavy sensations in the heart. Sometimes we feel like our heart is burning. Sometimes, it looks like our brain is going for a toss. And
Yeah.
because we always know that our thoughts and emotions and sensation in the body, all of them are related to each other. So my question is this like how it is defined in Buddhism, the concept of hell or heaven? So is this like a living hell for us, which we are creating within ourselves? And if so, then how can we let go of this hell?
Mm-hmm. So these kind of experiences, Buddhism says that, well, first off, Buddhism says the 6 types of rebirth are actual rebirths. So being reborn in the hell realm or the hungry ghost realm or the animal realm aren't just experiences, types of experiencing human life. They are actual ways you can be reborn and realms of rebirth. But as you mentioned, we can have a taste of those in our everyday life, right? As humans. It's not the same thing. So our experiences of different types of physical suffering, for instance, are a reflection of what suffering in a hell realm would be like, or our types of mental or emotional suffering are reflections of what suffering in lower realms can be like. So we can use those as motivation to not want to experience the even greater suffering of actual lower rebirths, but they're not quite the same thing. But as you mentioned, a lot of those things we are creating for ourselves in the moment. Not all of them, but a lot of them we are. And so then we can use different types of meditation practices to realize how we're causing those difficulties for ourselves, and then recognize those harmful minds when they come, and then develop antidotes to try to relieve ourselves from them. And so it's hard to give a simple answer because it depends on the context. But if I know that I develop strong anxiety about a certain thing, about a certain topic, and that anxiety causes heart palpitations and causes emotional distress and causes, feeling like I can't breathe and so forth, like a panic type of attack. Well, then I look at what are the causes that cause that to emerge? What are the situations? And what negative minds that are most likely going to be related to self-cherishing are going to serve as the causes that precipitate that emotional state? And am I able to identify them before they get out of control? Am I able to do something to slow them down so I don't reach that emotional state, so that I don't have those physiological or emotional responses to them? And so the way you do that, it's not going to be an immediate process. It's a process of trying to understand your mind. So engaging in a regular meditation practice that so you can slow your mind down and actually observe your mind in a meaningful way. By doing that, then you're able to see which different emotions are at play when, and which different afflicted minds are arising and how they're arising. And that's the first step, is being able to calm your mind down enough to identify what is going on. Then when you can identify it, then it doesn't prevent it from happening, but it can slow it down, or you can recognize it more quickly, right? So for instance, how often it's so easy to get angry that some sort of external trigger causes us to get angry, and we scream, we yell, we lash out, we do something harmful, right? Out of anger. The more you practice, you might still get angry, but you recognize that anger before you act out of that anger. Like that's the first step. Then eventually that anger is going to come less and less. But at first, you'll still be getting angry, but you'll realize it quicker. So then you'll be able to apply an antidote to it more quickly. So it's a matter of degrees, that you're not going to go from 0 to 100 overnight, but by looking at your own mind and engaging in a regular meditation practice, by learning how your mind works, then you're able to slowly release yourself of these self-imposed hell realms, as you say, or the harmful experiences. So that is possible. Okay, how about we end there? We still have 2 more seconds.
Venerable,
Oh,
just
yes.
one more question.
Okay.
How for Vipassana, SN Goenka has introduced Vipassana centers in all over India, in fact, all over the world, where we can go for 10-day Vipassana retreats. Are there
Yes.
similarly retreats for meditation happening, which your center is organizing?
Yeah. So the Tibetan tradition definitely has those kind of retreats. Our center hasn't done any retreats like that for a while. We're talking about it though. We are looking into maybe in September or later in the year. We probably won't do a 10-day retreat because most of our members work, and so it's hard to find a full 10 days to do a retreat. But we're looking into do like weekend retreats, like 3 or 4 day retreats, or what are more common for our center. Like start Thursday night and go until Sunday. So you only have to take one day off from work like this, most people. But throughout India, there are other Buddhist centers, Tibetan Buddhist centers that do longer retreats. So depending on where you're located, there's Tushita Center in Delhi and in Dharamsala, both called Tushita, and they do longer retreats. So it's very common in Dharamsala to do a 10-day retreat, or they don't do any 30-day retreats that often, but sometimes you can find 30-day retreats. Most often is 10-day retreats. So they're not the same as the retreats that the Goenka centers do, but they do have meditation retreats that go for 10 days or 14 days. Our center doesn't do a lot of them, but if you look throughout India, there are other Tibetan Buddhist centers that do it. It's part of our practice. But being an urban center, we don't have the opportunity to do that as often as we'd like. So it does exist though.
So, Venerable, are we planning to do any such kind of retreats in the near future here in Bangalore?
We're talking about it. We're trying to find a time to do. It's hard to balance everyone's schedule, including the teachers. So we are working on it right now. It is an active discussion between myself and the other teachers and the organizers at the center. And as soon as anything is organized, we will definitely be announcing it ahead of time. But it's good to know that there's interest in it. So we will definitely, that motivates us to find the time to do it. It's just difficult right now. But so I can't give you any promises, but we're trying. We're doing our best right now.
One more question, dear Venerable. Will it be a free of cost meditation retreat, or do we have to pay anything for it?
It's going to depend on where we end up doing it. There'll probably be a small cost that is depending on where it's going to be, however much we have to pay to rent out a space or to provide food and things like that. But that would be it. There's no other costs except for covering the basic necessities. So, but again, it's going to depend on where we do the retreat. So we will work out details, but our goal always is to offer Dharma free. So any opportunity we have, we do not ever want to charge for Dharma. And so if there is any sort of Dharma event that does have some sort of fee or charge to cover operating expenses, if that is something you're not able to do, you can speak to the organizers and we'll help you out in any case, because our goal is to never charge for Dharma. Dharma is free, and any expenses we have, we try to cover them through donations only, not through any sort of expenses or fees or charges like that. Sometimes it's unavoidable and difficult, but we do our best to work with everyone as best we can. But again, it's going to depend. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much, Venerable.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you for the questions. I appreciate it. Let us end with some dedication prayers. So we try to make our practice virtuous in the beginning, middle, and end. Virtuous in the beginning by setting a strong motivation. Virtuous in the middle by engaging in spiritual practice and study and exploration of the teachings of the Buddha. And virtuous in the end by dedicating whatever merit we have to our own perfect, complete enlightenment, so that we may more quickly achieve the state of Buddhahood, so that we may be of maximum benefit to all sentient beings. And so we will recite just these quick dedication prayers on page 36 in our Golden Prayer Book. We will do the first 2 verses into English, and then we'll repeat the second verse in Tibetan once, and then we'll do the short long life prayer for His Holiness Dalai Lama. So just set a strong mind of dedication, that may whatever merit I've accumulated today throughout my virtuous activity of studying the Dharma, contemplating the Dharma, engaging in practice, whatever merit I've accumulated, may that be dedicated to the benefit of all sentient beings, that it may ripen on all sentient beings who are suffering may experience freedom from suffering, all those who have died may experience a perfect human rebirth and quickly meet the holy Dharma and a virtuous friend to lead them on the path to Buddhahood. And all those engaging in holy and beneficial activities may continue to engage in those activities without any obstacles. May all of our teachers continue to manifest the appearance of strong and healthy lives, that they might continue to teach the Dharma and lead us out of samsara. And we ourselves may continue to advance on our spiritual paths, quickly becoming Buddhas, so that we may be of most benefit to other sentient beings. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel of bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Jan Choe Sem Chorim Poshe Makye Panam Ke Gyurchik Ke Wanyam Pa Me Payam Gone Gondu Pelwar Sho. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good, all-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso. Please remain until samsara ends. Thank you, everyone, for joining us online and in person. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Dawn.
I don't know. It's on. It's just
It's on.
only. I mean, the power is on. Oh, really? Well, even when the power's on, it seems like maybe only the hungry ghosts can hear it or something. I don't know. We I don't know.
Yeah, the power is off, but anyway, the mic, the system is not on.
I see. I don't
Which
know.
is also.
The last couple weeks, you turned